Scrupulosity. Scrupulosity is a term that I only recently learned about, and it was like painful for me to learn about. Can you talk a little bit about what scrupulosity is?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a topic that I think, as you just said, we don't talk enough about. And it is this unhealthy, excessive worry and guilt and anxiety we're feeling related to our religious and moral practices. And what's important to specify from the get go, there's no distinction between what your faith might be. The way I kind of think of it is that it's an equal opportunity disorder where it can be experienced whatever your faith and your belief is. But again, coming back to what scrupulosity is this excessive fear, worry, guilt, and anxiety that we are not practicing what our beliefs may be as we should, as we need to for our practices um, to be heard or seen by our God or and what we may believe in.
And what comes on the tail end of that? So the belief is I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough, I'm maybe not obedient enough, or I'm doing something wrong, I'm not living up to these expectations. And the result of that means what?
And as all anxiety is, the result is very catastrophic. So let's start with the most common ones that I'm going to go to hell or I am committing a sin. And maybe, again, the worst one might be for people is that not only I'm doing it wrong, but then my God does not see me. Like my connection with God is therefore not real. It doesn't exist. I would say the worst fear is that then everything I'm doing is not being seen, heard, and the connection I think I have, I no longer have because I'm not doing it perfectly.
That's scary.
Yes.
And I can very much relate to that. uh,
It's
I'm
very scary. Sorry, I just want to
oh yeah,
acknowledge
please.
acknowledge it. I think what we're just noticing here is in our core, our religious practices and our moral practices defines who we are. And in a very necessary way, I believe religion provides some comfort to people in terms of our mortality and existentialism. And so when there is doubt in this, that could be very debilitating. Like the saying that you're having the rug pulled underneath you. Like, really, you are getting the rug pulled underneath you, and you don't know what you're standing on anymore. Because again, our religion, our religious beliefs, our moral beliefs give us a little bit of that cushion. It gives us the wall to our house. It gives the foundation to our house, and it may be the roof too. It could be all of it. So you're right. When there is a doubt in us that our morality is not intact, or that we're not as moral as we think we are, and that our religious practices are fake or wrong, and not just wrong like, oops, I missed a word in my prayer. It's wrong like I am committing a sin because I didn't pray the right way. And that when I see Jesus, I see him in a bikini, like some intrusive thoughts like that. So it's again, it's not like, oh, I forgot a word in my prayer. I forgive myself. Well, I'll try again, and I'm sure my God heard me. It's it's this deep sense of being unsure. Are we doing it the right way?
I was I was journaling about this today in preparation for this conversation, just trying to go over my own past experiences and trying to find clarity around my own story, my own thoughts. And one of the things that really stood out to me is I've noticed it's something that I noticed in my religious upbringing is that my religion growing up seemed to provide the people around me with so much peace and comfort and direction. And it had this really positive impact on them overall. And for me, inside, I tended to have a deep sense of self loathing, of anxiety, of worry, of stress, of shame that I wasn't enough. I wasn't being obedient enough. I wasn't being good enough. I wasn't following the rules enough. I wasn't trying hard enough. And the solution that I had to that, I felt something was wrong with me for not experiencing the peace that everybody else was experiencing. And in my brain, I thought, oh well, the way that I get to the peace that everybody else claims to be experiencing is I just need to do more. I just need to be better. I need to be more righteous. I need to be more obedient. I need to be more disciplined. I need to be more diligent. I need to be less sinful. I need to step up my spiritual game. And maybe if I just elevate that a little bit, maybe some of that anxiety and dread and shame and fear and self loathing will go away. And I'll finally feel that peace and contentment and love and acceptance. And actually the opposite was true. The harder I tried, the more anxious I became. The more diligent I strived to become, the more I beat myself up when I fell short of perfection. The more rigorous and diligent I was in striving till I beat the best version of myself, the more I beat myself up when I fell short of what I thought I should be at. And so for me, it was this real catch 22 where the behaviors that I thought would bring me the peace of mind and help me feel the love of God more actually just drove me farther away, made me feel more isolated.
And that's what makes it such a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
You're right. The very thing that we think is going to bring us some peace, inner peace, and comfort only fuels our anxiety. And what's also very common about this is that perfectionism latches onto things we value. And and the answer is not to have no value. The answer is to embrace our values as they are, meaning, of course we value religion, and some of us value religion, some of us value spirituality, and we all have values. And we get this expectation that if for it to be meaningful, for it to be authentic, then we must do it perfectly. Meaning, like, let's go to the basics here. We falsely believe a smart kid always gets an A. So we think that the A, which is the highest grade you can get, is the only measurement that you're a smart kid.
Mm.
So it's kind of, I hope I'm not simplifying it too much, and I hope
No,
it's
I like this.
relevant, that that's what it really gets down to, is we have this false idea that in order for this to be genuine, authentic, fulfilling, good for us, we must do it perfectly.
Even acceptable.
Yes, we must pray every night. We must participate in all and any religious practices.
Yeah.
Like, if you must fast every year, you cannot skip a year, or again, attend church every Sunday. And again, I'm giving some Christian practices here, but we can think of some other ones as well.
Most religions have practices that can maybe I'm saying this wrong, but they can expose our. I guess this is one of the questions I have is, does religion create the scrupulosity, or are people susceptible to scrupulosity and then the religion just kind of exposes you to it?
I think it's the latter,
Okay.
meaning that uh, the way I the way I see it is we are imperfect human beings, and there will always be, from a young age, feeling less than. And when we don't have these conversations, or up until then, we come up with our own solutions. So I think the bottom line is that we're imperfect human beings, and that we are very capable and very deserving of being self-loving and self-acceptance, but it's not given. What's given is self-doubt, actually. What happens naturally is a little bit of the self-doubt. And so perfectionism latches onto things you value, as I was saying earlier. And so if you, again, whether it's religion, whether it is other areas of your life where you think I must do it perfectly for it to be meaningful, for it to be seen, heard, and accepted by my God, for my community, for me to belong. So I think that's also part of it, that we are wired for sense of belonging. So,
Yeah.
and so what happens, I think, having self doubt, questioning our self worthiness, and then needing for sense of belonging, we will latch on to these kind of perfectionism,
Mm.
because if I practice my religion perfectly, if I'm the perfect, Muslim, Jew, Christian, then I won't be rejected, I won't be abandoned, and I won't be literally kicked out of my tribe.
Yeah, I mean, the story that comes to mind hearing you say that is it's like the second story in the Bible. Or, you hear about everybody knows the story of Adam and Eve, and then Adam and Eve have kids, and you have Cain and Abel. And Abel's sacrifice, his offering to God is accepted, and Cain's is rejected. And they both made a sacrifice, they both made an effort, but Cain's was just lacking somehow. And I think there's always that fear of, am I giving enough? Am I giving with the right heart? Am I doing this the right way with people who are dealing with scrupulosity? There's that fear of not. It's one thing to not make an effort at all, and it's another thing to make the effort and then not have it be acceptable.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a real worry, at least I experienced a real worry that I was making the effort, but I was going to fall just short of the expectation. And um and then feel the wrath of God or the judgment of parents or witness the disappointment of church leaders. And that message is right there. It's like the one of the first messages that you learn about in a religious setting is you could make the effort and still have it not be accepted without and most of the time without explanation as to why one one effort was acceptable while the other wasn't. One sacrifice um was good and the other one was rejected.
And I wonder if part of, not having open conversations about these interpretations lead us to make those false conclusions that the perfectionism is the only answer. Practicing our beliefs perfectly is the only answer. So I think part of, not to jump ahead a little bit, because I imagine we will talk a little bit about how to overcome some of this, is because the answer is not to abandon your faith. The answer is not to not have a belief system if you wanted to keep it. The answer is being flexible with ourselves. The answer is mm, getting comfortable with being just okay.
Mm,
That I went to church this month once, or it's been a couple months since I prayed, and not allowing that judgment voice to interfere and obviously, use those against you.
mm.
So
Yeah, that's a scary thing to do. Um, I want to acknowledge that right out of the gate because if you're taught, so this is a question I'm very curious about. Um, there's a big difference between faith and certainty. Faith faith requires an element of doubt. Faith requires it's like a hope, but on the flip side of the hope, there's the possibility of things not panning out, not being the way that we believe them to be. And we leave a little bit of room for that. It's more uncomfortable. Um, but that's kind of what we're in many religions we're taught to have is this faith. But another conversation is certainty. Certainty is like I know without doubts. I'm certain. I don't have questions. Like I know that this way of believing is the right way to believe. I know that this belief system is the best or the right way. Capital R for right or capital T for true. You know, and so I'm wondering if I'm not trying to moralize either one of these, but I know I was raised with a sense of certainty growing up. And I feel like that sense of certainty that I had that didn't allow room for more nuanced thought, if that contributed to my the feelings of dread that showed up for me when I started to explore having a more nuanced approach to my beliefs. And I guess the question I have is, do you see that as a theme with people who struggle with scrupulosity? Is there a sense of certainty Are they taught a gospel or a religion of certainty instead of a gospel or a religion that's based more on faith? Is do scrupulosity and certainty come hand in hand?
A common denominator in all of this might be, or a word that maybe I would like to introduce is rigidity and consistency versus flexibility and maybe along with that, like imperfections, like things not being the same every time.
Hmm.
Emotionally and for our psychological health, a practice we have, for example, in therapy is a technique called dialectical thinking, which says that two opposite things needs to coexist.
Hmm.
So I think where we can get unstuck or free is instead of shame and anxiety and getting debilitated, and again, getting unstuck and free or finding some inner peace is allowing those two things to coexist. That I can have faith and doubt. And I know this is not an easy conversation to have. I believe me, I wouldn't go to church this Sunday like, hey, someone said I can have faith and doubt together. And people are like, there will
Yeah.
be people who will not want to hear that. But I'm speaking to our individual journey here that when we are feeling like, we must be always certain, we must always do things this way, the right way, the big R, as you mentioned. Those types of rigidities, like these types of mandates, the should statements, I think what feeds into the scrupulosity that we're seeing, where I think we're both kind of on the same page. It takes the joy out of religion and it takes the
Mm.
joy out of having moral values, which is what we don't want. So I think the answer is finding some ways to practice more flexibility, finding ways to practice more, you know, I will do my best. And then simply put, let go of whether it was perfect or not.
So let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like to actually do that. What it looks like to bring the joy back into your religious practice. Um, and the phrase, just let it go. It's it's an easy thing to say, but what does that look like in practice? Can you give me an example of maybe somebody that you've seen work through their scrupulosity to find a more nuanced, a more forgiving, a less rigid way of believing, and that kind of reintroduced some joy and peace into their life?
There are a couple ideas that I want to share with you. There are a couple, I guess, tools. One is we want to recognize, and again, this is something we do in general in terms of our emotional health, is to separate our values from our fears. Because we realize that a lot of behaviors we follow, a lot of actions we take, they're so fear driven. They're not value driven. So I think to find a healthier balance between, falling for that scrupulosity trap and yet still practicing your faith or practicing your moral values is deciding what does it look like when this is like value joy driven for me, and what does it look like when it's fear driven. For an example, when something is fear driven or is doubt driven, the big giveaway is the constant rumination we have or constant over analyzing and overthinking that we do. Whether it's something like about the, prayer we just did, we overthink and overanalyze it, or about or something that we're going to do this weekend. Like whether you're going to temple on Friday or church on Sunday, you are like overthinking something that you're about to do to make sure you are, presenting yourself perfectly. So that's a giveaway. Now we get to decide what would a joy-driven, value-driven practices look like. And along with that, I would ask the person, ask ourselves, why am I doing this right now? For an example, again, forgive me, I keep maybe using prayer just because it's kind of easy way of giving this
Yeah.
example. I always ask my clients, what's your intention? And again, we know when it's fear driven, if we're just willing to pause, we will very quickly see that I am praying because I don't know if I was nice to my coworkers today at work.
Yeah.
I'm praying because I made, again, small mistakes, versus I am praying because it's therapeutic for me.
Mm,
Prayer makes me release to my higher power what my worries are. So again, it goes back to like asking ourselves, do I have to do this or do I want to do it? Do I
yeah.
choose to do this?
Let me share a personal example from my life, and maybe that can also shine a little bit more light on this. So, I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints. They're known as Mormons, very popularly, and it's a very high demand religion. And one of the standards of worthiness is they have a fairly strict health code. You don't drink coffee, you don't drink tea, you don't drink alcohol, you don't use drugs, you don't smoke. Like there's a long list of don't do's. And I remember being so worried about consuming coffee that I went to a restaurant, maybe a buffet, and I had a bite of cake, and I could taste it was probably tiramisu, and I could taste coffee in it, and I was like, "What?" And I spit it out. I'm like, "Oh, I don't like. I can't eat any of this. If it even smells like it, like if I had a jelly bean that was coffee flavored, I would spit it out." It was like I wanted to stay as far away from the things on the do not consume list as possible. And last year, it's going to sound really strange, but I've been working on my scrupulosity and I wanted to get to a place where I was making values based decisions instead of fear based decisions. And last year, I went to Starbucks and I ordered, I think it was one of those pumpkin spice lattes, or I ordered some coffee, and and I had my first drink of coffee. And I will tell you right now, I did not enjoy it. It was disgusting. I was like, oh, this is not something that I want to have again. And I walked away and I was like waiting for the bolt of lightning to hit me from heaven. I was waiting for the evil feeling to sink into my body and tell me what a bad person I was. And it never came. And I realized maybe I was putting too much pressure or too much value, too much weight onto this health code, and maybe I could have a more relaxed view. And also, I decided I don't want to drink coffee, but it's not because I'm afraid that if I drink it, something bad will happen. It's because it's not for me. I don't enjoy the taste. It's just not something that brought me joy. And so now I'm still keeping the rule, but I'm keeping the rule because it's my choice and it's because it aligns with my values, and not because I'm afraid that I'm going to be smitten by God, punished by God if I have a bite of tiramisu and there's a little bit of coffee flavoring in it.
I love that example. And it's very relatable, but it's also a beautiful example of what it really means to be more authentic. And this probably doesn't need a disclaimer, but I would like to say it anyways. I am in no shape or form a religious leader or give anybody religious advice. However,
Yeah.
I would like to respectfully say the following: that whatever your religious practice is, it's fair to assume that your God wants you to be happy. And if you are in this state of being where you feel like nothing you do is ever good enough for your religious conduct or your religious code or your God, you're anxious, you're unhappy, you're miserable. So I think that could be another way of maybe getting ourselves to realize, like, what I'm doing could not possibly be what my God wants for me. Look at me. I am, in the stories I hear is like I can go to sleep because I'm praying 500 times, and I am ruminating about every mistakes I made, or I'm overthinking, over analyzing conversations I had to make sure that I didn't say something morally wrong. I didn't lie. Was I being honest? Like, people really decoding every word that comes out of their mouth, making sure that there was no dishonesty, no lying, no discrimination in the way they treat other people. So that might be another way of kind of starting to give yourself a little bit of this like leeway here. I grew up in Turkey, which is 98, genuinely, I'm not making the statistic up. I think 98%, if not 99%, Muslim country. So I grew up with a lot of teachings of Islam and principles of Islam. And one thing that's very true is that, your relationship with God is between you and God. And that's one of the best ways I have seen setting those boundaries, that it's between me and my God.
Hmm.
And you then decide what the value base
Yeah.
will look like.
One of the things that we talked about last time on the last interview that we did together was how perfectionism can be directed inward, but it can also be directed outward. So you can have the inward focused perfectionism, which is I need to be perfect. I need to be better. I need to have everything be a 10 out of a 10 all the time. And then there's the outward directed perfectionism, which is kind of judging other people and holding them to an unreasonably high standard. Can scrupulosity manifest itself that way in our lives as well, where we become anxious about our beliefs in religious practices and we try to impose that on other people or judge other people for their not reaching our standard?
Definitely, definitely. So this is based on the model of Dr. Paul Hewitt and Dr. Gordon. I'm just going to say his first name at least. And they have a model of perfectionism, which is what you were just describing. This idea that we have a self oriented perfectionism where all our perfectionistic expectations are targeted at ourselves. And then we have other oriented perfectionism, which obviously affects our interpersonal relationships because we now um, project all our perfectionistic expectations to other people in our lives. So when we're talking about religious expectations and when we're talking about being having highly unattainable religious expectations of ourselves, most definitely it will be subjected to other people around us. So and that can show up with our the way we're parenting. I think we may have the other oriented perfectionism where we expect our children to, do things, follow certain religious practices perfectly rather than supporting them to come to their own, interests and having their own um, exploration, which, as you can imagine, in their adult lives, it will create more peace and joy about religion rather than this, like, I was forced to it. So other oriented happens. I also see it in therapy when couples may change in their religious beliefs and practices and interests, where one partner may continue if or be more involved in the religion, and then the other person either have stayed the same or they have withdrawn even more, and they don't want to be part of this particular religion. So there's a little bit of that gap that can feed into this perfectionism. So in those situations, what we really want is for couples to work through, like we would with any other differences, is work through that and not focus so much on religion, but focus on how do we as a couple deal with differences.
Hmm. So how do you not I love that you brought this up because this is ultimately what I wanted to get to because this is a podcast for couples. This is a show that's directed specifically at couples. And I do see a lot of couples in my life on a regular basis who are, one person in the relationship is going through a transition of faith or a crisis of faith. Their belief system is changing, and it causes the more devout person or the person who remains in the religion a lot of fear. What's going to happen? How are we going to raise our children? What does this mean about like our marriage and our family? Are you going to go start doing things that are completely counter to my values? How do we explain this to our friends and family members? If this fundamental thing that I believed was true about who you are has changed, you've now become a stranger to me. What does that mean? So this is like it's a really scary thing to experience. And if the more faithful person, if their life in large part is revolves around their religious beliefs and other partners not participating in the religion, how do you not make it about religion? How do you scale back from that a little bit and talk just about your marriage?
As you said, it's important to maybe validate how difficult this would be on any
Yeah.
couple. So, because it's complicated and it's heavy and it will require a lot of patience to work through it. may I also say, I think I want to pause and I want to come back to again recognizing how difficult it is because I think marriages are also very difficult.
Yes. Marriage alone is difficult. Yeah.
Yes. We- and I say that with so much respect to marriage, and I say this with so much compassion that when we decide to, I'm in a committed relationship, I'm married, and when we decide to marry someone, I think we have to be more honest that spending the next 30, let's say, like good, 30 years of our lives together is a very long time, and there's going to be a lot of changes.
Or 40 or 50 or sometimes 60 or 70.
Absolutely.
I interviewed a couple on this show that was married for 72 years.
Oh my goodness.
72 years. A lot of people don't even live that long.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I married my husband when I was like, I think I was 30 or 31. So I'm like giving myself like good, okay, like 40 years. Let's say I lived up
Yeah, but I mean, the likelihood of you living into your 70s or 80s, probably pretty high for most
exactly.
people at this point with technology the way it is. So that's
Yeah.
like a solid 5 decades together.
Exactly. Exactly. So when we maybe start from there and really recognize the depth of marriage and the meaning of sharing our lives over 5 decades with a person, we have to be willing to and patient and open minded. And my goodness, I know these are hard things to practice, but I have to just at least put the words out there. Patient, curiosity, open mindedness, non judgmental about any change the other person is going through. That's the secret here. That's why I say, how can you not make this about religion? This is why. Because I have to put into perspective that religion happened to be one of the things you guys are starting to be on different pages about. But it could be about money. It could be about where you want to live. Maybe one of you want to live in the mountaintops, far, far away from everybody else, and the other person wants to live in the city. Let's just imagine like a New York City kind of like this metropolitan, busy, busy, busy streets.
Yeah.
So we have to again look at it that way first and foremost, because sometimes again looking at it as a religious issue becomes like, well, they're doomed. There's nothing we can do. Oops. No, there is things we can do because this is not unique to religion. It just religion happened to be one of the things that when you spend 5 decades with somebody, and let's just say 10 years, 1 decade with somebody, you're supposed to see changes in them. Now coming back to then having understanding this, having compassion and empathy that this can happen to anybody. We're talking about religious here, religious practices. I think hopefully what we've been talking about is one of the things to look at, which is perfectionism. We need to look at how our perfectionism getting in the way from us being curious and non-judgmental towards our partner's journey and open-minded. So we need to kind of like do that work on our end, kind of clean our side of the street of like how much of is this you and how much of it is this like whatever religious practices they have. Because I heard you make a point like what if their religious practices very different than yours? Or what if interferes with parenting? Um, so I think we really need to make sure that it's not our own perfectionism and that our own rigidity that is making the situation more complicated. Then the other, I think, concept to consider in couples relationship is looking at maybe the core values here, because I believe we're similar in this attitude that whether you're going to a temple on Friday or you're going to a church on Sunday, you and I probably have similar values. So I think as a couple, we need to maybe work on when you were saying as an example, I'm sure that like, I don't know this person anymore. I
Mm.
would question that. Do you really not know this person just because they're going somewhere else in another day and they're doing it differently? Like their prayer is different than yours? Are you sure they're not the person that you married? Are they not the person that want the best for the kids?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think we make a lot of assumptions when we marry somebody, especially when we marry somebody in a religious sense where it's like, okay, you go to the same church I do. You maybe even were raised the same way I was raised. And so because we go to the same church, we were raised the same with the same set of beliefs, then we are on the same page with regards to our values. we're in alignment. We make that assumption. And I don't think many people really, Brene Brown talks about this a lot, but she talks about core values and how you can't live a value that you can't name. And I don't think if you ask those couples what their core values are, they could tell you these are the three things that are our core values as a family or as a couple that really kind of define who we are as people. Most people could name things that they value, but core values are much different than that. Core values are the values that make up your character. They play a role in how you make big decisions. When you're not living in alignment with your core values, that's when you start feeling that icky feeling of like when you lie to somebody or you start feeling burned out in life because you're not living in alignment with your core values. And if you can't identify or speak your core values, then you're probably not intentionally living them. And so going through the process of determining what your core values are so that you can speak to your partner on the level of values instead of on the level of practices or acts or behaviors will make such a huge difference into around how you see them and then how you can have this conversation going forward. Now, if some of you might be thinking right now, well, how do I figure out what my core values are? If you go, I literally have a 7-day challenge that's designed to help you go through the process of figuring out what your core values are. And you can do it for free if you go to epicmarriageclub.com and then just sign up for the 30-day free trial and then go do the core values challenge. It's a 7-day thing. I literally was just reviewing it this week and I, I was like, dang, this is really good. So, I think it'll be a really valuable thing if this conversation sounds like something you want more of. Back at you.
I love that. I love that. And what you're saying makes me also remember that in relationships, our knee jerk reaction to crisis is one of fear.
Mm.
We believe that any crisis we're going through may be like an earthquake. We think that that the building is going to collapse. And sometimes we have to, again, practice that mental muscle that differences or crises or changes, I should call them, because technically this is not necessarily a crisis, it's a change that may bring us
It can feel
closer.
like a crisis though.
Yes, exactly. That's why I want to be mindful that it can feel like a crisis, but is it really? So maybe it's a little bit more neutral or objective to call it a change. Any change, any new exploration each parties do may feel like a crisis, most definitely, because why? We're afraid that's going to pull us apart. And what you're saying reminded me how I think part of like what I would tell the couple is make sure the way you're looking at the situation is not, I know this is simply said, but negative. Because if you're looking at what you guys are going through and thinking in your head, this is bad, this shouldn't be happening, very classic cognitive distortions. This shouldn't be happening. It's not a good sign. This will be the end of us. I'm sorry, we're doomed because of your cognitive distortions going into the situation versus what you just walked us through. What if these changes in my partner's religious practices or my religious practices is a opportunity to reconnect, opportunity to get deeper about what makes us us.
Yeah, an opportunity to know my partner better because obviously there's a mystery here. There's
Yes.
unexplored terrain. What do I not know about my partner that I've been ignorant to or avoiding or they've been scared to tell me?
And here's how I guess tie back to perfectionism here too, where when you just said like, who is this? What is it about my partner? I don't know. Here's what we're guilty of. And I'm going to again put myself in there too, because I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing people here. We marry our partners and we falsely expect them to never change,
Mm.
right? We falsely say, this is what I signed up for. You cannot change. And that's the perfectionism. This is the package I bought. Not that we buy each other, but this is the package I have, and you cannot change. So I think the answer has to be curiosity. Answer has to be patience, being non-judgmental, because we don't know where that journey is going to take the person, the one that is exploring different faith or the one who is deciding not to be part of any faith. We don't know where they're going to go, but we just have to also accept that in this moment, they are questioning or changing or exploring different faiths.
I love that. Okay, can I want to volley back to earlier in the conversation where you said you had a bunch of possible solutions, but you didn't know which one was your right, and you started by talking about taking a values-based approach. Did we miss anything that could be other potential solutions or helpful strategies to deal with scrupulosity?
I think I would maybe name a little bit more that we already did actually give examples of, which is um, so we discussed the idea of looking at or leaning towards that value driven life versus a fear based, fear driven life. And along with that, what I was suggesting for people to be more intentional. When you are practicing certain things, make sure that is what you're intending. Like that's what your intention is. That's what you need, not what you're again supposed to be doing. Do you want to do this right now, or do you feel like you have to? You
Mm,
should be. That's what a good Christian, good Muslim would do. So that's kind of like a part of that intentionality that I want people to check in with themselves. And then the next one, which is again, you gave the
just one
example of,
one thing.
yeah,
When you are in that should space, do you recommend people try to get to the want to space? Like when it comes to activities, I'm doing this because I should. Do you recommend they still do it, but try and find the desire internally? Or do you recommend that they take a break from doing the things that are shoulds?
the latter, which may tie into what the another tool is exposure. So exposure meaning which which is another way of saying doing the opposite of what we've been doing, or at least that's how I kind of explain to my clients. Like,
Oh, that's a scary thing.
yes, yes, because we have to do exposures in a sense that we have to do them imperfectly. I would intentionally tell them, make mistakes, makes mistakes with your prayer. Or let's say you're making a donation and your budget was 20, give 10. And then where you will bump into in that what I should be giving what I really all that I can, which is $20. Or I have the means, I put aside $20 to donate to this charity. Why are you making me do 10?
Yeah.
And it's getting this idea that it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to give 20 every time, or even if you have it. So part of, I think, answering your question, if they've noticed their intentions behind a certain action and they realize it's fear driven, yes, the answer is not to follow through. Because here's why. Again, this is kind of going back to a little bit of like psychology of things. The actions we take, the way I explain to my clients is that the actions we take signal back to our brain what's okay and what's not okay. So when you're afraid of something, like let's say you got this worry that you didn't, again, I'm going to keep using prayer as an example, but you didn't pray the right way, you missed a word. And if you go back and pray again, you signal back to your brain that having any imperfection in your prayer was unacceptable.
Mm,
Like you set the rule now by your actions. So it's very risky, and it's actually not just risky. It will set you up to fail if you keep engaging in that fear driven behavior, even if you know you shouldn't. Like, I'm sorry, but once you notice your intentions are not, they're not healthy, that your intentions are perfectionist, your intentions are fear driven, you cannot resume. Because if you follow through with that behavior, you signal back to your brain that it was okay to be fear driven, it was okay to be perfectionist. So we're kind of back at square one. So I
and
agree. Yeah.
not only that it's okay, but that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yes. So you kind of recredit that belief. Like as if like you just gave it another, and like you fed that belief again with your actions.
Yeah.
So it's that idea of rewiring our brain where when we change our behaviors, we change the way our brain perceives things or the way our brain expects things to be.
Wow. This conversation has gone by so fast for me.
Oh my goodness.
What what have I not asked you about yet that we need to talk about with regards to scrupulosity?
Maybe the one thing that I would mention, because I just cannot imagine having any of these conversations without bringing up compassion.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. What does self-compassion look like?
So self-compassion is being understanding, empathetic, and kind and forgiving towards ourselves.
Okay. Can we talk about the irony of scrupulosity and how I think almost every religion in the world, the whole goal of the religion is to make the world a better place by showing compassion to others. by being more understanding of others, by being more kind to others. And yet, when you're dealing with scrupulosity, you practice the exact opposite towards yourself. You're so harsh and so cruel and so judgmental and mean and nasty. And that is so ironic to me that we're asking ourselves to be the opposite of how we are with ourselves, with other people.
Which is why I was saying earlier, maybe for some people, one way of breaking this vicious cycle is realizing, like, is this really what my religious like wants for me? Is for me to
Yeah.
be my worst enemy? For me to beat myself up if I accidentally, again, ate something I wasn't, or, drank something I wasn't supposed to, or miss a word or make a mistake. And um,
I
so
said a swear word in my head, or I thought like a racy thought about a girl that I have a crush on, or
that,
I didn't pay a full 10% tithe. Yeah, the list goes on and on.
yes, I didn't help out every single person I see on the street that needs my help.
Right.
And so it adds to our discussion that we need to be more compassionate towards ourselves, because this is all about finding inner peace and finding a healthy connection with what you believe in, and giving yourself that permission that that there's some gray area here, that you can do things a certain way where you are not left with shame. We are not supposed to feel this much shame, or any shame. We're not supposed to be in so much misery, and and I mean it, like in our inner battle, that war we have with ourselves. It's not supposed to be like that. So giving ourselves that permission to, like, I will try coffee, and if I don't like it, I don't like it, and it's between me and my God. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, compassion with figuring all of this out. Give yourself compassion, which compassion means giving yourself time, giving yourself patience, giving yourself a leeway that
Yeah.
this may take a little bit of time to figure out where I stand and how I want to do things.
This to me also sounds like part of the process of making your relationship with God more personal instead of institutional. I think a lot of the scrupulosity that I felt came because I let the organization of my religion, my leaders decide these are the benchmarks and these are the ways that you create a relationship with God. And I didn't have an internal authority. My spiritual authority was all external. And as I have started to practice some self-compassion to do these things, come at my beliefs from a more values-based instead of a fear-based place, I've discovered an internal authority. I've discovered that I do have values and I do have internal morals and a compass. And that also my when I listen to that instead of only listening to the external, that my relationship with God is different. It's more personal, it's more meaningful. And when it was purely institutional, I was disconnected. I felt very disconnected from who I now believe God to be.
I think you said it so beautifully. And because I think when it's personal, it's more empowering. When it's personal, it's more fulfilling. And that's ideally, again, what we're looking for. We're looking for a sense of fulfillment inside us so that we can live more peacefully. And I believe institutions are necessary to maybe introduce us, but institutions can be where we, like, turn to for answers or how we're supposed to do things. Like you said, let the institution maybe show you the way, but you got to make it your own along the way for it to make sense, for it to stick, for it to be peaceful.
Dr. Menije, I need to tell you that this conversation is probably the most important conversation for me personally that I've ever had on this 10 years of doing this podcast. Uh, my experience of trying to untangle the immense amounts of like shame and grief and sadness through my religious experience has been a very painful one. It's been a hard journey. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And I probably didn't experience scrupulosity to the same extreme or degree that many other people suffer from. But like being able to have a conversation like this and understand a little bit better what role religion could or should play and what that could look like, and having a healthy relationship with God or a higher power or just even your own spiritual self, the universe, like understanding understanding what it could look like without that shame. This has been a healing conversation for me. So it
Thank
means a lot. And I really know it's going to mean a lot to other people, especially couples who are in that really scary space where one person is changing
yeah.
and the other person doesn't understand or know what to do about it. So thank
It's
you so much.
And thank you. It truly is my honor that I was part of this conversation with you. I really appreciate you trusting me to have this conversation with you, and inviting me back here. So I really want to just thank you as well. And I think this was such a wonderful conversation because of your vulnerability. So thank you for sharing your stories. Because, like you said, it makes people feel less alone. And it's a scary conversation when we have it individually and when we have it as a couple. So I hope we can give people some compassion that this is a scary conversation, but we can have these conversations because we can come up with some ideas. There's ways to work through these experiences. And again, thank you for having me here.
My pleasure.
Did you enjoy this interview with Dr. Menije? If so, I want to invite you to check out Perfectionism University right here, and make sure that you subscribe if you want to hear more conversations like this.